Hey, what's up, guys? It's like Chris here. Just wanted to stop by for a couple minutes today. Won't take too much of your time. Today we are going to take apart the Drever. Um, Sometimes it can be a little intimidating if you've never done it before, but hopefully this video will help you get through it. And best advice I can give you is watch where your screws go. A lot of times it'll pay to get, if you don't have one of these. I mean, you can use the Olight mat as well. Just something that I like using these kind just because it got a raised edge. Something to keep your screws contained so you don't have to worry about digging through the carpet for half an hour after you took a knife apart. But you'll need a couple things. You'll need, of course, your driver. Um, if you have a O-pry, one of the two bits in the side or in the back side of it is the two sizes that you'll need for disassembly. One side is a T6 Torx, and the other side is a T8 Torx. So you can use your O-pry conveniently, so you don't have to go out and buy some bits. It pays to have good bits too, so if you get to stripping them, which you'll probably do at some point in time, I've done it plenty of times, but it pays to have good bits. I usually use these bit drivers. I usually keep a couple of them laying around. But for me, it's just easier. It's just how I like to do it. But it's just pretty much personal preference. You don't have to do it that way. I do it with two drivers so that I don't have to flip flop the bit inside the O-pry, and it's a little bit easier to use. But let's go ahead and jump into it. You got three kind of screws in here. You'll have your pivot screw, your clip screws, and your body screws. Your clip screws and your body screws are the same size. Those are going to be your T6 Torx. Your pivot screw is going to be your T8. Me, personally, I start with the clip. There'll be two screws. I usually just screw them until they seem like they're coming out a little bit. Tap on it, and it'll fall right out. Take the second one, do the same thing, or you can screw it till you can see when it's pretty much getting ready to come out. And I try to keep them in the clip if I possibly can, but sometimes it doesn't sometimes it doesn't work like that. So just be careful what you do with your screws. I usually set them off to the side. I usually put the screws with what I take off. Next, we're going to work on the scale screws. These two scale screws back here, what they're doing is they are connected with this barrel in the back. That's what keeps your knife from pinching closed. So just like the clip screw, unscrew one side and let it fall out. Sometimes it can get a little stuck. If you take one all the way out and then try to take the other one, sometimes the barrel might spin. To prevent that, if you keep the one side in just a little bit, and a lot of times you can either put your finger on it, you could get another bit the same size, or you could even just leave one side in until you get the knife apart, and then you could just take the other side off once you have the knife taken apart. But most of the time, you can get both of them out. So we got both screws there. Now with these, most knives, some of them are a little bit different, but there's little grooves, so you don't have to worry about this just like falling out or flying out once you take the two screws out. It won't come apart until you actually pull the two liners apart away from each other. So right now you can see you got your scales and you got your liner. The only thing that's holding the knife together right now is your pivot. So what you're going to do now is take your T8 Torx bit, and you're going to want to loosen your pivot screw. You're going to take that all the way off. You set that to the side as well. Now, here's where you want to kind of be careful and make sure nothing's really going to pop out. But you have washers in here, so what I like to do is try to take it off piece by piece. That's how I like to do it. Take off the scale there, and you have some oil and some stuff on it. Sometimes it might feel like you can't get this one scale off. Sometimes it pops right off, like this one here. It just came right off for me. So just be careful. Like I said, there's washers, but if you kind of take a mental picture of how you take it off, and I also like to lay the pieces down how I took them off. It helps me sometimes when if I'm being forgetful. But then you have your spacer here that I was talking about. So it kind of fits down in that little notch. Set this off to the side as well. Now, since you took the one side off, you can actually take your whole blade and lift it up off the other side. Now, sometimes the washer or bearings, whichever it may be, sometimes they'll stick to the either side of the knife, like they are here, or they'll stick to the liner. In this case, they're both stuck to the knife, so we'll go ahead and leave it like that for just a minute. Now up here, you have your pivot, and then you're going to have your blade stop pin, I guess you could call it. Now this is only held in by pressure. This is just sit down in this crevice on the one side, and then when you put your scales back together and you screw your pivot in, that's what holds this pin. So there's not actually a screw for your top blade stop. And once you got that, you'll have your pivot just like you did on the other side. You can pop that out, set this off to the side, and now here's your two scales and your two liners. Now we'll go ahead and take these bearings out of here. If I can. See, pretty basically just washers with a whole lot of oil on them. But you take your cleaning cloth. You don't have to use this kind. I usually like to use that one, or I got several different kinds laying around. Excuse me. But I like to, especially when you're taking, just even if it's simple scale swap, I like to, since I've already taken apart the knife, I just go ahead and just give her a nice wipe down. A lot of times you get pocket lint, debris, dust, dirt, maybe whatever you have in your pockets, it could easily get in there, and you might not notice it right away, but over time you'll definitely be able to tell it in the action. It won't be as smooth. I usually kind of wipe off everything I can. Now, I don't actually have my patriotic scales yet, so we're just going to put those back on, but it's to be the same principle once you have your scales. Now, we're just going to work our way backwards from how we just had it. And if you ever get to, like, if you drop something, you're like, oh no, I don't know which side I had which, and you'll always notice that this side, see how it's nice and clean and doesn't have anything wrong with it, no imperfections really. And then this side has your silver ring right there. That silver ring is going to be where your washer touches your liners. So what I like to do is grab that one, make sure I know which side it's going to go on, and then I grab the scale that goes on that side, and I'll stick it on there. Now this is what I like to do. I'll take the pivot. You'll notice with the Drever, it's got a flat side. It's not completely round. It's got one flat side, and then the rest of it's round. And if you'll notice here, I don't know, you might be able to see it. In your liner here, you can see how there's a spot on the bottom. It's kind of hard to tell. But down here on the bottom, it's the flat. It's not completely round. What that does is it keeps your pivot from spinning freely. It helps you tune your knife, and it keeps it in line. But the flat part will be right here. The flat part's going to go towards the bottom. So you just take your pivot, push it back through your scale. Of course, pretend like this is the patriotic scale now. And you'll see that it only go in one way. So if you can't quite get it, just turn it just a little bit, and it'll eventually it'll pop in there. And see, you can see it's flat on that side and round on the rest. So now you have, it's partially done. Now sometimes you can do it now, or you can do it after a while, right before you're done. But a lot of times I like to take this back spacer that's back here, and I will take a screw that came out of one of the scales, and I'll go ahead and screw that back in. Just screw one side in, and sometimes it might not go all the way completely tight. That's fine. There's no problem with that. But it keeps you from having to worry about trying to get it back in once you have the pivot back in together. So then I'm going to take this little blade stop here and put it back down in its little notch. And then a lot of times I'll set that down just so that I don't have to worry about flipping and flopping something everywhere. Now a lot of times these have oil on them. I don't usually ever dry them completely off. I just kind of wipe them down just a little bit. But you'll take that, lay it right back down on your pivot. And these washers, some of them are different in other knives, but these are the same on both sides. So the orientation won't matter, which if you don't have to give them exactly the same way as they came off, because both sides are the same. But it's pretty basic. You just put the one pivot on, or you put the pivot in, then you put the one washer on, and you'll take your blade. And what I like to do, I like to take a little bit of blade oil. You don't need much. A lot of people use it way too much. But I just put a couple little dabs in there. And I do that on both sides. You can kind of spin it around. And what I like to do, I'll pick it up now. And just be careful, because that pivot could still fall out, and so could your stop pin. I'll take that blade and I'll just stick it back on there. You can keep it closed if you want. A lot of times you can hold it right there. And I mean, it's not going to go any further than your stop pin, because your stop pin's there now. You take your other your other washer, I'm sorry. And you'll stick it right down on top of there. For extra measure, if you want to, you can just put put a couple little drops here on this side. And it'll eventually, once you open your knife and close it enough, it'll work its way back down in there and get all over the place. I'm going to set that down, wipe this one off just a little bit. Just had a little bit too much on there. Pick up your knife. Now remember, you got your side you can see the imperfection there, where the washers wore the coating off. You'll take that. And just remember, this is going to be your lock. So that's got a little bit of spring action to it. So be careful when you stick that on there. And you'll be able to feel, because remember, you'll have your barrel spacer back here, your blade stop, and your pivot. You'll be able to tell when you have them all three lined up. And then you'll take your other patriotic scale, and you'll just kind of slide it in place there. Now I like to start at the pivot and work my way out. So you take your pivot screw and your T8. You'll screw it in. You don't want to go real tight. You don't want to crank it down too hard. You'll be able to kind of feel, once you have all the other screws in, how tight it's too tight. If you ever get to wondering which way your pivot goes, this is always considered your show side. This is the side, the clean side, the side that you would show pictures, show other people. And always make sure that the flat side of the pivot without the screw head is on the show side. Then you'll take, since you already got your one screw in for your clip side, or for your scale, now you only got this one last clip. one last screw. Stick that in there. Take your T6. You'll go ahead and screw that down pretty snug. You don't want to crank on it too hard, but just to where it's, you know, hand tight is good enough for that. And then you will take your clip, and I still got one of the screws in there. Just kind of line that up over those two holes. Sometimes you gotta kind of guide it in there with your bit driver. Helps if I'm kind of close to it. Line that up. Just slide that first one in. You don't want, like I said, you don't want to tighten it up too hard. Just enough to make it hand tight. But a lot of times I'll take my fingertip here and I'll kind of hold that other clip screw, and you can kind of guide it in there. I mean, you probably drop it a couple times. I usually do. I'm surprised I didn't that time, but you just kind of guide it in there and keep tighten those up snug, and make sure your other ones are still snug. And then now is when you'll be able to tell if you have your pivot too tight or not. You can try to work your knife, and what you want to make sure that you do when you put it back together is you want to make sure you don't have any blade play. And blade play is going to be your movement of the knife from side to side. If you're holding the scales, you don't want your knife to wiggle from side to side. If it's wiggling from side to side, then you need to do a little bit of adjusting, tighten your pivot a little bit most of the time, and that'll be a lot of the solution to the problem. But you can also look down the knife and you can see how centered the knife is in that spacer that you have in the back. If it's uncentered, or if it's a little bit off center, you could take your pivot driver and you can see it move. A lot of times you can see it move from left to right by tightening or loosening. And this is what you call considered tuning your knife. You can then take it and get to where you think it's about center and see how she deploys and how she closes. And if it's smooth and there's no blade play, then you have done a good job and you're good to go. So hopefully that helps you guys a little bit. Feel free. You can always reach out to me or any of the other guys. Where most of us are pretty well versed in the knife world too. I actually started off my EDC hobby collecting knives and stuff like that. So it's been about 15-20 years that I've been collecting knives, and I've got quite the history. So yeah, just remember to it's something, you know, might even help you too if you take a picture. Take your phone real quick and just take a picture of how the screws are set. Especially if it's your first time, you know, if you're kind of nervous, just take a couple pictures, and then you can go back and look at those pictures when you're putting it back together, and you're like, oh, okay, you know, this screw needs to go right here. Just remember, don't force anything. You don't want to cross thread anything. Everything should go back together fairly smoothly. I would always remember to use good bits, because if you get to stripping your screws, then you could have a real big problem. And some people, I mean, I've done it plenty of times myself, but hopefully that helps. Let us know if you have any problems. Hope y'all have a great week, and let's get ready for this flash sale. All right, guys, take care.